Welcome to brandylibrary.tv for the Ambassador series again. This time we're staying here in the United States of America, but we're going to the West Coast, to California with Dan Farber, and these ones, Osocalis. Dan, nice to have you here. Can you tell us a bit about this fabulous brandy?
I started production, my interest in brandy started many decades ago. And actually we moved to Santa Cruz County to build a distillery, mostly based around apples, because traditionally in the Pajaro Valley, it was a very large apple growing region in California, and we thought the climate was very, very suitable for production of apples for apple brandies. And in fact, early on, we still focused on apple brandies, but very, very quickly after establishing the distillery, we realized that California not only has huge amounts of wonderful fruit to offer for brandy production, but also in terms of market, that it was important to actually be looking at grape. And there are actually other reasons why one would be interested in doing that as well, in terms of the aging characteristics of both apple and grape. So we established the distillery now 20 or so years ago.
Wow.
And began distilling, as I said, originally focused on apples, local apples, but we've since broadened out, not so much because of the necessity of climate, but more because it tends to be that certainly in the apple growing regions that they tend to focus on one or two varieties. And so to get a broad variety of apples, we actually have to move outside our region.
I see. So now, today, is it solely vineyards and therefore brandy that you're distilling?
Let's see.
Still a bit of apple.
Oh yeah, this year we'll probably crush something like, we think about 60 tons of apples and something like about 175 tons of grapes. So that's
how many barrels will that be landing you?
Units, barrels, is a barrel at 80 proof. Let me just put it a different way. So for a ton of apples will typically yield about 120 gallons of juice, and a ton of grapes will typically yield somewhere, let's say, 170 gallons of juice. And the cider will be somewhere about 5% alcohol, and the wine from grapes somewhere about 10% alcohol, and we'll recover most all that alcohol. So from 170 gallons of juice at 10%, we'll get something like 17 gallons of brandy, or 15 gallons of brandy at full proof. So that's about 30 gallons. So it takes about, for our barrels we could talk about that a little bit later. We have a lot of cooperage, but our standard barrel is 100 gallons. So to get 100 gallons usually takes something like, let's say 300 gallons, 350 gallons of wine.
Of wine. All right.
So, and more of apple.
Oh, very good.
So,
you're using the same still for all of this?
We have two stills. We have a 5 hectoliter Alembic Chante, and we have a 12 hectoliter Alembic Chante, and we use both of them. The smaller still, which was our original still, now allows us to tailor some of the production to smaller vineyards or smaller yields. If we can only get a few tons off of a particular place, we can actually use a smaller still. The larger still, which is 12 hectoliters, needs about 1,000 gallons to just get started. So, that's going to be quite a few tons of fruit. So we can use them both separately, or we can use them together. We can do the first distillation in the large still.
Santa Cruz?
Yeah.
How's that special, and how's that good for brandy production?
So the Santa Cruz Mountains appellation was the first appellation in the first grape growing appellation in the United States that was actually drawn on geographic boundaries. And the western slope of the Santa Cruz Mountain appellation falls at the 600-foot contour interval. And it falls there because that's where the change in the marine influence is really strongest. So we have the Humboldt Current that moves along the west coast of the United States, bringing cold water along the coast constantly. And we have a very hot interior. So we have Death Valley, not too many hundreds of kilometers away. So you have a hot interior, a cold coast that brings fog in all summer long. As a matter of fact, our summers are quite cool, actually, because as the valleys, as the Santa Clara Valley heats up, it sucks that cold air in. Below about 600 feet, it's just too foggy and too cold to get very high-quality grapes. Above the 600-foot contour interval, you can actually get this nice marine influence, very cold evenings, warm days, very cold evenings, perfect for fruit.
I see. So
for
this
wine
is
production.
about where you are.
Our fruit is actually now sourced from a number of appellations, but they all share this characteristic of being strongly influenced by the coast, because what we're looking for, many people think that wines for brandy production are somehow leftover wines from winemaking, or something that somebody could do nothing else with, and so you actually just extract the alcohol and make brandy. But it really couldn't be any more wrong. The wines for brandy production have to start their lives in the vineyard knowing that they're going to be for brandy production. So the winemaker, the vineyard manager, and the distiller have to be on the same page as to what they're looking for in this fruit. And it's something very special for distillation, because the process of distillation concentrates so intensely the flavors in the fruit, things that are below sensory evaluation threshold in the still wine as we're drinking it pop up and are quite prominent in the distilled spirit. So if one takes wine that has very nice, sensory evaluation for our still wine for drinking with dinner, in many cases, when you compress that or compact that by a factor of 10, you end up with things that are very heavy.
Yeah, not too pleasant.
Not too pleasant in the distillate. So we really have to tailor the wines for distillation from the beginning.
But then, because of that weather, you must have very good acidity then.
We have very good acidity, and as a matter of fact, it's something I think that's little known. What the heck? We can always cut these things out if we don't like them, right? I'm not a huge fan of New World wines, in the sense that I prefer wines, even red wines, even still wines for drinking, with very nice acidity. I think they go better with food. I think they're more naturally,
I'm on your side.
And in California, that's what we're doing better, but we tend to lack wines that have great natural acidity. We can ripen fruit like nobody's business. That getting sugar is not a problem. We will never capitalize in California. But keeping the acidity and keeping the balance in the fruit is really our challenge. So if you look at the Charente, if you look at the region of Cognac, the fruit there is just classically what would be called underripe for still wine production, but perfect. It turns out perfect for brandy production.
For the cognac production.
And that's because they have a hard time, or at least many years in the past, classically they had a hard time getting that fruit to the classic ripeness of 24 bricks.
Yeah, now actually they'd love to get it a bit lower, because it's getting a bit sweet.
It's getting a
bit.
The
weather's
warm.
Changing everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's nice and acidic there. So when we think California and with heavy wines, this is certainly very different. It's not that dry, hot California that would not suit your brandy production.
No, it
because what you're producing, what we'll be tasting very soon now, is very similar to cognac.
It is, and it turns out that the fruit we're getting from California. So let me, for instance, give you sort of a classic thing. The Colombard that we're getting from these heavily marine influenced regions, we'll pick it anywhere between about, let's say, 19 and 20 bricks. We'll take that in. And in cognac, that would be a number that would make sense to people, 19 or 20 bricks. And the total acidity there in cognac would maybe be about 0.85 TA, with a pH of something like 3.25 or 3.2, something like that. When we take our Colombard at 19 bricks, the TA is, in many cases, over 1. The pH sometimes is below 3.2. So these wines have, and we can let those fruits ripen a little more. It's a very delicate balance, because
but not lose the acidity.
Sometimes we have to let the fruit ripen to get the acidity down. So unlike the classic California wine, where we're really suffering this loss of acidity to get the fruit ripe, the Colombard that we take has both more sugar and more acid than the classic wines of the Charente. And it produces something that's clearly related to the great brandies of the Charente, but different.
So you're mentioning Colombard. Are you also using the other classics?
So
the Nid Blanc and the Folle Blanche, or other grapes? What are you using for your brandy?
Well, we will be planting Folle Blanche, a bit of Nid Blanc, primarily Colombard, some of the classic varieties. But today, really, it's impossible to find Faux Blanche and Uni Blanc in the regions where Faux Blanche is actually gone for all we know in California. And although there is Trebillon or Uni Blanc, it's not in the regions where we would want them to be. So we're planting them because we feel a great need to ensure a source and supply of this fruit in the right growing region in California for our product. Luckily, the vineyards that we're using today, the Colombard vineyards we're using today, are typically 80 to 100-year-old vineyard, head prune. I mean, just absolutely spectacular fruit.
Well, what about the soil? What about the soil? What's in the ground that makes it maybe somewhat similar to cognac or quite different? Is that why it's very good but a bit different?
It's why it's very. We don't have the soils vary from region to region where we get them. None of them have the great chalkiness of the Grand Champagne, for instance. You know, I mean, we're not planting in. I mean, there really it's the total amount of limestone that define the cru. You know, and we see that influence in the eau de vie. In California, Alembic brandies, we don't know. I mean, we haven't had enough time. We've only been playing with this. I'm saying we. I'm including the great distiller Benjamin Robin, who has another 10 years of experience even on top of me. And there, I think, combined, we're really looking at knowing about 35 or 40 years of history of classic brandy making in California. And that's a very short period of time for a brandy. I mean, for me, one of the most wonderful things about brandy, I mean, here we're in the brandy library. This is sort of a mecca for all spirits. I mean, not just brandy, for whiskeys, for eau de vie, for rum, for really all the classic spirits. And I love them all. But brandy, for me, is something special because the lifetime of brandy is really on par with the lifetime of a human lifetime. So the great cognacs of the world, they age for about the same period of time as one human, 80 years sometimes, right? And then that's it. It's really the only spirit that has the ability to age over that long and improve over that long a time scale. So for me, they're very special. But coming back to your question, we don't know yet in California. We only have about half that amount of time under our belt.
It's still a young industry, and it's not an industry.
No, it's not.
It's a young culture.
Yes, and so we're playing with different things rather than just the soil, rather than just the cru. We're playing with varietals, and this was something that was developed not by myself. It was really developed by Benjamin Robin and Robert Léonté, who came over from Remy Martin, who began to distill different varieties than were used in cognac, and that's because by law we're not restricted, and we have those fruits available to us. And so the style of brandy you see here is, I would say, more influenced by varietal characteristics, less influenced by terroir. That may change 40 years from now as we really,
Well, then I suggest we
let's try something.
We taste them.
Yeah.
Then we've got two here.
Okay. So you have here our rare Alembic brandy. This is our youngest bottling. It's based primarily on brandies that are about 6 years old in the barrel, and our XO, which is based on brandies that are primarily 14 years old in the barrel. And while all the methods we use the traditional method de Charente, it has to be tailored. In the Charente region, you'll find a very rigorous distillation process. And in California, because we have different varieties, because we have fruit that needs to obtain different ripenesses to express its varietal character. And because of that, we need to distill them quite differently.